Welcome to day 2 of week 3. Now, if you remember from the day 1 video, I said that you would have chapters 5 and 6 for this week to read. Now, in the day 1 video, I did actually talk about and go over chapter 6. So for today's video, we are going to go over chapter 5. So quick recap, chapter 6 did talk about the office environment and safety. Chapter 5 for today is going to deal with communication and all aspects of that, both verbal and nonverbal, and how we deal with different types of patients when we are communicating. So communication is really a necessary requirement of our everyday daily life. I mean, think about it. There's not one day that goes by that you don't communicate with somebody. Okay? I mean, I do it either via these videos or I do it in a daily conversation. I'm always communicating with someone. But in the medical field, the ability to really communicate is essential for the success of the company, not only for you as an individual, but the company itself and for the patient. That's everything from when we get the phone call from our patients who need refills, we call those in, patients who come into the office, we get their chief complaints, and we provide a helpful insight for the providers so that way they can treat them to the best of their abilities. The concern that we have for our patients will show in many different ways. It's going to show in our words, how we communicate with them. It's going to show in our actions, and it's going to show in our gestures. But it's also going to show in our tone of voice. We have to be able to communicate with a wide variety of people within the medical field. That could be patients, physicians, family members of the patients, vendors who come in, our coworkers. Every day we're going to communicate with different people, and you have to be able to do that in a very easy, light, perfect way of communicating. Okay? There are many different channels in which we can communicate with our patients. For example, we can have face-to-faces. When they come into the office, we can discuss things with them over the phone. In letters, written text, pamphlet, we can discuss and communicate over a fax or an email. All of those are different ways that we're going to communicate with people on a daily basis. So we're really going to work on those skills of making communication easy and perfect and wonderful for all of you. But it doesn't just end with having really good communication. You also have to have good interpersonal skills. Now, what an interpersonal skill is, it falls a lot under self-awareness. We have to be aware of ourselves, of our character, of our values, of our attitudes, because that is the first thing that people are going to see and they're going to respond to. Mostly it's going to be our attitude, so we have to be self-aware. We also have to understand and work with different styles of learning. Some people are going to be auditory, so they're going to have to hear it. Others are visual. They're going to have to actually see it in front of them. I'm a very visual learner. So you'll see me do a lot of hand motions, but I really have to see it to believe it. And then you've got the people who are kinesthetics. They want to touch things. They want to put it to action. They want to do that hands-on stuff, which I'm starting to learn a lot of you like to do that. So now let's discuss the different types of communication. There's two different types. There's verbal and there's nonverbal. So verbal is really the written words, sounds, and tones of voice that we use. When you're a medical assistant, you're speaking to a patient, you want to make sure that you are speaking loud enough that they can hear you, but not so loud that you are yelling and you're breaching that HIPAA confidentiality. Remember, you still have to keep their personal information private. We also need to be very cautious of the words that we are using. Choose your words very carefully. If you ever think back to think before you speak, that becomes really important in the medical field because choosing your words can help keep you from being rude or impatient. Sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and keep it to yourself. Okay? Don't use a lot of technical terms or medical jargon because a lot of patients don't understand those terms. Okay? Not everyone is tech savvy and medical savvy and they know all the terminology. Use simple words that everyone can understand. And really take into consideration the education level of your patients. Sometimes people can have bachelor's degrees and they understand everything, and sometimes the highest level they had was 3rd grade or 8th grade or high school. Always take that into consideration and adjust any sort of patient education that you're doing or communication that you're doing to fit that style and that need. You need to have a positive attitude. I think that's number one. If you come in and you are positive and happy, that patient has a good experience. If you come in with some negativity, not going to want to come back to you guys. Okay? You also want to be empathetic as opposed to sympathetic. So what's the difference, right? What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Well, empathy means that we can understand what the patient's experiencing. Where if we sympathize with them, we're actually going to go through that experience with them. And that's not what we want. We want to be empathetic. We understand what the patients are going through, but don't hit their level with them and feel all those emotions that they're feeling. And the second type is nonverbal. So all of that was verbal conversation. So what's a nonverbal conversation? So that's really any of those facial expressions, the gestures, your body language, eye contact, grooming, and mannerisms that we use while we're communicating. If you're not making those eye contacts with people, it's a bad nonverbal communication. Breaks that barrier. So we always want to make sure that whatever we're saying verbally matches what we're saying non-verbally, and vice versa. You know, if I sat here in these videos and I was like, this is how I'm going to talk to you, and I'm going to have this scowl on my face, you wouldn't get anything out of this video. Coming in with that positive attitude and my open body language helps you guys to understand the materials in which I'm teaching. So always look at how your body language, your nonverbal communication, and your verbal communication is, and make sure that the patient isn't getting a mixed message. When we're talking with a patient, we need to be aware of a lot of language or a lot of barriers that can happen. There are tons of barriers to communication. Some of the biggest ones are a defensive behavior. So if your patient comes in and they're very defensive and aggressive, it could be due to stress. Don't let that be a barrier for you guys. Don't let their body language, their aggressiveness, cause problems for you to treat them. Again, don't use those medical jargons. Don't use all that medical terminology. Keep it simple for them. And also think about the cultural issues and the diversities that are out there. You're going to deal with people of different languages who have different viewpoints. Sometimes you're going to have problems with stereotypes or biases and prejudices. Don't let those affect your communication. Treat everyone the same, regardless of what differences that you all may have. Alright, so the last topic I want to talk about in the video today is dealing with special circumstance patients. For example, the number one thing that you're going to run into in the field a lot is going to be angry patients. They're the number one thing I see on a daily basis when I'm working in the field. And they're the most difficult to deal with because their aggression and their anger can set us off as well. Always remember, stay calm. Don't go to their level. Don't get aggressive with them. Keep that positive attitude, keep that positive communication, and try to calm the patient down as well and find out what the problem is and how you can help them. Opposite of that is we have our anxious patients, our white coat syndrome people. Same thing. Keep calm, speak calmly, and reassure them. Let them know it's going to be all right. Let them calm down before you really start to do any sort of vital signs. Smile at them. Smile can fix a lot, and it can calm a lot of people. And be empathetic with them. Again, don't go to that anxiety level with them and be sympathetic, but be empathetic. Understand what they're going through. You might have to deal with hearing impaired patients. So a lot of these patients will use sign language as a form of communication. Now, not everyone knows sign language, but learning the alphabet is a very easy thing that you can do, and you can slowly spell things out for patients. They also may have an interpreter who can speak and communicate with them in their sign language. If that's the case, please make sure that you're still looking at your patient, not the interpreter. Their job is to communicate what you're saying, but you always want to make the patient feel like they're the most important person, okay, not the interpreter. Really, you should never shout at your patient if they have a hearing disability, okay? You still want to speak to them in a calm manner, but speak slower and speak clearer. Face your patient. That's the number one thing you can do for them, is actually physically look at them. And if need be, have a pen and paper available and you guys can write things out together. Another thing that you'll have to deal with is visually impaired patients. So when you have a visually impaired patient, they may have a sight dog, but not always. They may have a cane that they use as well. The important thing that you need to do, always announce yourself when you're coming up to them so you don't startle them. This is even when you're going into the exam room. Don't startle them and just walk in. Give it a knock and say, hi, I'm coming in. Let them know you're there. If they don't have a guide dog or a guide cane, give them your arm. Guide them to where they're going and actually spell things out for you. Say things out for them. Give every little detail as you go. The scale is 3 steps ahead of you. Lift your left leg to the scale. Give them all those good instructions so that way they understand what's going on. Same as our hearing impaired, face them when you talk to them and speak clearly to them. And like I just said, explain all procedures and medications and things in full detail. And try not to leave them alone for too long because it can feel a little secluded when that happens. You're also going to deal with mentally or emotionally impaired patients. If you can, try to determine what level this patient does communicate at and what they understand so that way you can communicate best with them. They generally will have a caregiver with them, and if that's the case, they may give you some tips and tricks to help you, but don't talk to the caregiver. Talk to the patient still. Speak slowly and calmly when you're talking with mentally or emotionally challenged, but also keep your messages short. Don't go into full detail with them. That might send them into being aggressive, or they might get agitated. And if that happens, the caregiver will help you kind of calm them down. Another large number of patients you may have to deal with are those that do not speak any English. This is something I know I deal with on a regular basis. Number one thing I do is I smile at my patients. Let them know that I'm going to try to do everything I can to communicate with them, but a smile is the number one thing that can start off a visit correctly. Determine if they do understand any sort of English, and if they don't, use an interpreter to help communicate with them. But just like our patients who are hearing impaired who use an interpreter, always communicate and look and talk to your patient. You can use a family member as well, but we really advise to not do that because family members don't tend to give us the whole patient side of it. Patients can say things and we only get half of the story, so we always encourage using an interpreter that is hired through the facility you work with. You can also use pictures or pantomiming or hand motions to kind of show things, kind of like you see me do a lot in my videos and in class. That's going to help explain things as well. The last set of special needs patients you might have to deal with are those who are physically challenged. Now, physically challenged does not mean just a wheelchair-bound patient. It could be patients who use canes or walkers as well. When you're dealing with these kinds of patients, be patient with them. Okay? Don't get impatient or try to rush them along. Give them the time that they need. Okay? Treat them with the respect and dignity that they deserve. Just because they have a physical disability doesn't mean that they're any less of a person. And allow them to move around and ambulate on their own, but if you see that they're struggling or that they really need help, give it to them. If they ask you to push them in the wheelchair so they don't have to push themselves, do that for them. Be that guide and be that good advocate that they need. Okay. Alright guys, that's all I have for you this week. I'm really excited about week 3 and what we're going to be learning. As always, I will have all of your materials printed in class, so you will not need to print anything. And I look forward to seeing everyone on day 2. Bye-bye.